Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox. Today I want to talk about getting into paper magic if Arena doesn't end up being your thing, but also I want to give a little bit of an extension on kind of the update on what I've been doing with my deck since we last filmed. So this is my current deck list. As you can see, the one card in here that I'm not quite in love with is Lay Down Arms, just because I haven't consistently had a lot of planes. Maybe I can push Bushwhack instead. Another card that I wish I had more of is either Restless Prairie, just because the animation plus the kind of advantage to going wide is really beneficial for, that could potentially end the game. And it would also give me a reason to say, maybe I could pull one of my Bushwhacks for an additional Restless Prairie, pushing my land count up, but also causing the aggro to begin to encroach into my lands to where I can more consistently go off with a land assisting that explosion of power. And I could do that with Restless Prairie. Razor Verge Thicket is also pretty fast. I do enjoy that one. Looking at the deck though, I think I might need one more plains. Oh, no, wait. Because there's already 3 courtyards. Right. Okay, so the low end of this deck has me casting 1-drop white creatures quite consistently. So I want to definitely have that. Also, my 2-drop creatures are all in some part white as well. And half of my 3-drops too. So that's a really important thing for me to have out early and consistently. So that's where I want to put, say, half of my mana base. As you'll see, there's not a lot of mixed color cards in this deck. Maybe I could do that. Maybe I just wanted it to be fast. It's certainly performing pretty well as is. There aren't any really crazy mana costs in here, or really crazy specific ones. Botanical Brawler might be a little bit specific at 2. But looking at this deck, you would think there's not really a big top end, but actually the top end is basically infinite because of cards like Progenitor Exarch, Jade Light Spelunker, and just the way the Botanical Brawler works within combos. And then Virtue of Loyalty, this is now my kind of top end. This is I'm just gonna win the game from this point. As long as you can't remove this, I can play into this to be very powerful. It also comes with a really great adventure to kind of cover your ass going into it and give you something to build up. Putting +1/+1 counters in this deck on a creature with Vigilance also is really powerful because it allows me to create a wall that can also pick off one of your units per turn. So it can make it really hard for you to go wide while also allowing me to go tall, but not excluding me from going wide. So hopefully I can win on 2 fronts there. My opponent doesn't have, say, a lot of board wipe. And then the game enders. Do I have more Storm the Seed Core? I don't. Okay. That is a really good card, though. I super enjoy this. I'm also thinking about playing this in paper, maybe in the what's called Pioneer. I think Pioneer is the format. With Ram Through, which would be really powerful. But this allows me to, first it allows me to grow something pretty tall. It allows me to, if I have a wide field, get a lot of counters on a potential Botanical Brawler, but also that Trample and Vigilance. Again, it's just great to put Vigilance on the field, and this deck tries to get a lot of Vigilance. Virtue of Loyalty essentially would give it permanent Vigilance and permanent +1/+1 counters, whereas my 4-drops either give them temporary +1/+1 counters, or maybe more over time if I can flip the battle. This one gives +1/+1 counters and Vigilance, but also very important Trample, because if I'm pumping up a bunch of creatures that don't have Trample, and there's several in here, say I built up, let's say my early game plan was to build up something with Vigilance to kind of hold me until the late game where I could give everything Vigilance or build everything up, or do both of those things at once. This would allow me to give that creature, which may be like an 8/8 at this point or something, because I've been building it up for a little while, and I can add counters to it with this, and maybe I'm getting the other effects that are giving me additional counters. I'm getting those triggers as well. So this could allow me to swing for half of someone's life total with Trample very easily with just one creature, while also beefing up my field, giving them all trample as well and allowing them to swing, but also allowing them all to block for me on my next turn, so not leaving me open. So this basically replicates some of the things that Virtue of Loyalty does, but 1 turn sooner if I need that, or a little bit faster on lower mana. But one of the things that the number one thing that this deck does really well is to... Oh wait, that's actually a really cool activated ability that would work with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. This is also an activated ability that works with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Wait, sorry, that's a triggered ability. That's a triggered ability. This is an activated ability though. Oh my god, I could have people tap for their power. Wow, Agatha's Soul Cauldron is really crazy. It's no wonder this card is super expensive. I wanted to have a 1-of for this deck just for some crazy jank, or for even cheaper way of putting counters onto my creatures. Being able to do that for free could be helpful. But one of the things this deck does pretty consistently is getting Kami of Whispered, and honestly, as often as I do, I need a 4th one. As often as I do that, I really need the 4th, I think. Move an invasion over here. I'll move both invasions over here. That's fine. Now we're at 60 cards. A little short on land, though. Okay. This is a really efficient deck, so it doesn't necessarily need land as much, but I really would want one of those for this, though. Okay, I think I'm done screwing around with it. But one of the things that it does pretty consistently is get one of these guys out and then starts adding power to it one way or another. There's a lot of ways to add power to this. And even at this point, something like Enduring Bond Warden turns out makes this go from tapping for 1 to tapping for 3. And then, now that I have this large amount of mana, I can start doing things like, one of the first things that I'll do, or one of the things I'm more content doing for lower amounts of mana is the Jade Light Spelunker, and play, because just building up 1 creature sort of big, also being able to predict what's on my deck, maybe even filter some lands into my hand if I need them, that can be helpful. But often when I'm going off, I don't necessarily need the lands, and it's just a big beefy creature. It's pretty cool though with Botanical Brawler on the field because it gets a lot of triggers, but yeah, it seems like it gets a lot of triggers with it. I'm not sure that that actually works that way, but often I'm able to get the Kami up pretty big, and then I can start doing some overwhelming things with stuff like the Progenitor Exarch, which I'm really surprised isn't worth more. I bought a lot of these in paper. In fact, I'm building this whole deck in paper, and the whole thing has turned out to be really cheap with a couple of exceptions. The Virtue really being one of them. The Kami's about $1. I think Fight Rigging is somewhere in that same ballpark. Warden of the Inner Sky I think is a little bit expensive. Clearly can't afford even one of these. They're very expensive. But I have a Dorita, and I'm going to be getting some of these because they aren't nearly as bad as you would think. But from there... So, from here I want to talk about getting into paper Magic, and that's been a process that I've been, trying to bring part of the family through, at least. Trying to get one of the kids, as I said in the last video, to learn. And also teaching my girlfriend as well. So, one of the things that we're doing is building Commander decks, because that is the most popular format. It's also, I think, an interesting, probably one of the more interesting formats to play in a lot of ways. The decks are, compared to the 60-card format, pretty inconsistent, but that also makes them interesting to play against and interesting to play. It also becomes like more of a showcase. It's a really interesting kind of format because in multiplayer, a lot more people, there's a little bit more of a standoff element, which allows people to build up into more elaborate deck types. It makes it the way the politics tends to work out, slows the game and takes it from competitive 1v1 Magic being fast to a much slower game that has a lot more interesting and devastating often combos. Now, one of the things that you're going to want building into this format, though, is non-basic lands, especially if you're playing a commander with multiple colors. And if you're playing a 3-color commander or something, which I don't necessarily recommend for people who are getting started, it would probably be a little bit easier in a lot of ways to start with a 2-color deck. Getting non-basic lands is going to be pretty important. If you are a 3-color player, you're going to want 2 to 3 of each of these categories that I mentioned. But remember that non-basic lands are limited to 1 of each in the Commander format, which is a deck of 99 one-of cards and a single commander that is not in that deck. That is your 100th card, essentially. And the only thing you can have extras of are your basic lands or color or other cards that explicitly say you can't. But looking through, like, the various card purchasing websites, looking for average market prices on different runs of non-basic lands, I've discovered quite a few that are all pretty cool, some of which can work into some really powerful strategies in a way that other cards don't, which is really interesting, but are all under 30 cents a piece. Now, one of the biggest deals when you're shopping online for Magic cards is going to be shipping and getting that shipping into a good place, and there's a lot of magic to optimizing your cart. And really, Commander is the reason that you're playing. It's like all of the reasons that you're playing Paper over Arena all rolled into one. It's a social format, and Arena, I mean, you've got your little emotes and stuff, but, like, you're regularly in a regular game of Magic, like, playing cards, telling other people what they do, talking to people, having conversations across the board, that kind of thing. And in comparison, a game on MTG Arena, even with the little chatty shit, isn't the same. You're playing cards into a wall of silence, from a wall of silence, socially speaking, and, like, if you need to get out of your house and see some people, it would probably be better to do that at a card shop than sitting on your couch playing MTG Arena. I'm just saying, it's a much more social format. It's also a multiplayer format. Multiplayer in this way just isn't really possible, and I mean, like, more than 2-player. 3... I think it's a 4-player format, actually, but, 3+. We did try. I did really early on in this format. I think we tried at a card shop to play a 6-person Commander game, and it just went so goddamn long. So very long. I think I got killed by a Charbelcher combo as I was actively begging for death because I needed to go home and sleep before school, and it was like the shop was ready to close already. I was like, look, there's nobody else here. I'm ready to go. They're willing to honor this game unless you keep playing, but I think they were there till like 2 a.m. Anyways, if you want to play Commander, you're gonna need your non-basic lands. I hope I've helped you find some of those, and just beyond that, like, just looking at what we as a family did to try to build a collection and build stuff for us individually, some things that we individually did which worked the best. We tried buying, like, lots of cards on, I think it was Amazon. I was kind of surprised that happened on Amazon. It wasn't like an eBay thing. And we had pretty poor results from that, honestly. It just felt like a whole bunch of bulk bullshit that people wanted to push off. There wasn't really anything all that good or interesting in it. I did get a couple of, like, low-cost cards that I was incidentally looking for my Commander deck, and we did find some interesting cards in there, including one that I'm genuinely not really sure how to play, but it seems like it might be actually really broken. I just don't recommend that. We got so many duplicates. Although, at the same time, it was maybe like a $20 box of 1,000 cards. There were no lands as advertised, and it was able to sell the 400 duplicates to our local card shop for a grand total of $4. So I guess it was only like... essentially, it was $16 for about 600 cards with any amount of variety. Which, I guess, I don't know. Like, it just wasn't what I wanted to build my collection from. It wasn't what anybody really wanted to play with in the house. We picked some cards out of it, and we tried to build decks out of it, but they don't keep up with the other things that we have very well, because we just have such a shit selection of cards from it. The other thing that we did, and this was interesting, but and I think it would be a good place to start for a lot of people, in a way, especially a lot of people who are really just getting into the game. But I also think it's an interesting teaching tool and game by itself. But there's a JumpStart pack that Magic sells. It's 5 decks, all single color, one of each color. All the tokens and everything you really need to get started playing. And while I absolutely think that there are definitely cool archetypes that could be built from by improving these single color starter decks or combining them and their strategies into dual color decks, doing things like that, I think this would be a pretty interesting way to get started, although naturally your strategies would be limited to things that have some synergy with these 5 decks, but that would give you a lot of different things that you could do in theory. What we ended up actually doing with this, we couldn't use it in that way because we realized this is just a really interesting multiplayer format that removes deck building. It removes a lot of your knowledge of the game. It removes spending a lot of money on cards. It's a really balanced, in some ways, way of playing. And it's just kind of fun to have them as they are and have that as it is, just as a game by itself. That like, if you have friends over who are interested in Magic but aren't really like, they don't have their own decks and they're playing for their first time, this would be a better way to teach them than by breaking out your really stupid combo deck and like going infinite into their face. Like, it's just going to be a lot more friendly for people to come into, so we wanted to keep that for folks that are wanting to learn, or friends that we have who've come over to our game night and don't know how to play yet, or want a not ridiculous format to play in that this is basically its own format in my mind. So that didn't work out, but it could have. Some of the deck lists were pretty interesting. There was kind of like a discard, resource denial, sacrifice. No, I think it was sacrifice mainly. Strategy with black, and there was blue, I think was like flyers and fast stuff. Like instant speeds interactions. I think white was about going wide with low-cost creatures, so more of a white weenie strategy. Green was about getting big and stompy, and I think it was elves and mana into maybe elf ramp, something like that. And then goblins, I would say, goblins and burn. So, kind of like goblins and elves showing up. It's like the oldest of Magic tropes. It's pretty classic, I would say, and an interesting kind of format just to have to see the basics of Magic before you get into some of the crazy stuff. In a way, it heavily reminds me of the introductory tutorial to Magic the Gathering Arena, and that's something that I have I don't know, I really like it. I think Magic, as it stands, as it actually functions, is very complicated. So it's interesting to see it simplified down into the basic things that each color does, instead of seeing something complex sometimes. Let's talk about the various types of lands that are under 30 cents, and then we'll talk about these lands from lowest price to highest. So the first I want to take a look at are the dual type lands, and there's also a snow variant of these, and these are just the basic dual type lands. What I mean by dual type is, like, for instance, in the land types, it's not a basic land. However, it is, say, mountains, plains, or island, swamp, something like that. This allows it to be called to by other cards and allows it to be referenced by other cards as one of those two basic land types, which can be really important. Let's say Lay Down Arms, the card that I just removed from the green-white deck that I was showing you. It removes cards based on how many planes I have in play. that would be a way of giving me a non-basic plains that would allow me more versatility in my deck while not overall lowering the plains count as much by allowing me to do 2-in-1. There is also a snow version of this whole set, of this whole run. So an example of the non-slow versions would be Alpine Meadow. And these are about 15 cents a piece for cards like this. They're maybe one of the more basic, but also maybe one of the more useful as well, especially when we talk about some of these other ones. And when you're looking at some of the even more expensive lands, these can be helpful with that too. And for the snow, we have something like Arctic Tree Line for 30 cents. Then we have the 3-color Triomes. These cards are kind of old, and there's probably better versions of these out there now. There's probably better versions of these on this list, honestly. But these they come in tapped, and they tap for one of 3 colors. An example of this for Esper would be the Arcane Sanctum, and these are about 25 cents a piece. Next, we have the Bounce Lands. So Bounce Lands are some of the only lands in the game that actually tap for 2 mana. Like, they generate 2 mana at a time in a combination of colors based on one of the guilds of Ravnica. So any of those basic 2-color combinations has one of these lands, but as cool as all that sounds, they require you to return a land from your battlefield to your hand. You should always usually try to use a tapped land for this, so that you're not losing mana on that turn, and that will allow you to build up more mana next turn. And also, if your deck runs a little bit low on lands, potentially, this will give you a land drop for your next turn as well. And with lands that have entered the battlefield effects as well, this can allow you to reset lands or allow you to use their abilities more than once. There's also ways to get these onto the field untapped from your hand, potentially, or untapped from your deck, that would allow you to ramp even faster than normally possible. This is a little bit tricky to do, but these can really factor into some cool decks. An example of this would be the Azorius Chancery in blue and white, and this is going to be a 15 cent card. Then we have the Tap and Sack Dual Lands, which I don't think are as good as, say, the next group of lands, but just because they only call to 2 colors. You can get one of 2 basic land types. For one, these don't even call to, like, all of the basic land types, which is a little bit weird. But I guess you can only have so many Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanses in a Commander deck as well. But, like, even in a 2-color deck... Okay, so the dual lands like this, example being Bad River, are 25 cents. However, on the other hand, the next group of lands I have are the Tap-Sack Tri-Lands. These can call to 3 of the basic land types. So let's say we could do green, blue, or white in the case of Panorama. And these cards are only 15 cents, and they could grab you a plains, an island, or a forest, essentially. So I don't know why I would only want 2. I don't know why those would be more expensive. Even if you don't have the 3rd color referenced on the card in your deck, just don't get one. Just don't get one of those. Just don't get one of those. And also, since these call to the basic land types, you could also get the dual type lands that I mentioned in the beginning with these, which would be pretty cool. I think that's a pretty neat play with them. So I really like the Tap-Sack Tries. There's also a Sack Try, which I think is potentially even better. You don't have to tap it. It sacrifices as soon as it comes into play and gets the thing. I get the idea that you have to tap a land to get its effect, but like, come on now. We all know that you're going to sacrifice that Evolving Wilds. The only thing I would say is, like, from a paper perspective, from like as a player, it would be really annoying that they have to search for their land in the middle of their turn instead of like passing and searching during the next player's turn. Just in terms of like wasted time because of procedural things in a paper game, as opposed to like Arena, where this is automated and done basically instantly. that additional trigger doesn't take a lot of time in the way that it can, because you also have to shuffle your deck afterwards, so it can just be a whole process if you do it in the middle of your turn. But, on the other hand, a card like Broker's Hideout is only 5 cents, so this may be the very best of the three. Definitely better. You could get a whole playset of Broker's Hideout for the price of one bad river. Just saying, even in the budget and value cards, this is probably the coolest of them. At least in terms of like price to value ratio, these are very good. Then we have slow lands. These are ones that say that they come in tapped unless you have 2 or more basic lands in play. So this can be a little bit difficult if you're running a lot of dual lands. So if you are looking to buy only a few dual lands and you want them to be good in your deck, these would essentially almost never come in untapped unless they're one of your first plays, and you might be able to eat a turn with like less 1 mana early on. But we're looking at cards like Canopy Vista for 30 cents. And out of all of these cards, these are some of the only ones that don't come in tapped, which is usually a very highly valued thing in more competitive play. This is the kind of ability that causes a land's value to just ramp up tremendously. So the reason that this hasn't happened with the slow lands is that a lot of those decks that do those type of things also don't run a bunch of basic lands. So this card kind of runs counter intuitively to what makes lands expensive, which means that it will probably remain cheap and might be hard to play in certain really good decks. This may be only a card for the players that haven't spent a lot of money tricking out their mana base, but it's also a lot of value as a card, and a very powerful card at that. So if you're only getting if you're only getting a couple, like a Canopy Vista or 2 for 30 cents is pretty good. Now, of course, you won't need more than one of these for Commander, but if you were playing this in 60 card, you might want the full playset. I'm just thinking, like, if I only put 4 non-basic lands in my deck, if I was running, and honestly, the deck that I'm using right now in Standard doesn't have that many non-basic lands in it. A little bit due to my own wild card poverty, I guess, in Magic the Gathering Arena, that I don't have more non-basics for this deck, but I've been liking to play this fast. So if I were, other than the Restless Prairie, if I were to swap out the other 4, it would be for something like Canopy Vista, because then everything would basically be untapped a little bit later into the game at the very least. There's also Reveal dual lands. Now, I don't like these quite as much as the slow lands, but they are perhaps more universally useful. You could use these in a whole variety of decks, and they are also going to allow you to get your dual land in untapped. Again, usually this is a very highly regarded thing, but you have to have relatively specific cards in your hand to be able to pull this off. Not super specific, just one of the other 2 basic lands of the colors it represents, which can help you out of being mana screwed, but it's kind of particular. It doesn't execute as well as you might think. Also, you're giving your opponent hand information to bring this in untapped, and I think that that's worth it. I don't think that these are bad lands, but I think that it is a little bit more of a trade-off than some other things can be, like paying 1 or 2 life. But again, I think that a lot of people would prefer this even to that if it weren't for the fact that you almost always have plenty of life to pay, and very rarely, especially when you're really screwed and need this card the most, do you have the extra basic lands to just say, hey, I've got this in my hand. Then we have the Scry lands. These are the temples. I'm actually surprised that these cards aren't worth more, because scrying is such a cool effect. I'm also not surprised because these are tap lands. They are rare tap lands at that, but they are still tap dual lands. The one thing that they have that I think makes them really cool is that you scry one when they come onto the battlefield. This is a pretty cool effect to have on a dual land. I think that free scries are just excellent. I was always a big fan of Halimar Depths back in the day, which is it just taps for blue. It's basically just a non-basic island, but it allows you to rearrange the top 3 cards of your deck when you play it. Really slow card in a lot of ways, and not a big payoff after its first turn, but rearranging the top 3 cards of your deck's pretty cool to get as a free effect tagged onto a land. So being able to scry with these temples is also pretty cool, because unlike Halimar Depths, if I see something I don't like, I don't just cringe and know I have to draw into it. I can put it on the bottom of my deck. Also, when this card finally untaps a turn later, it's not just tapping for 1 color, but 2. So the temples are really cool. There's a full run of these for 25 cents a piece. Then we have the artifact/indestructible lands, and I'm kind of surprised that somehow these two things both ended up on a card together, but also isn't expensive. I distinctly remember there being a run of artifact lands that are really expensive. I think I had one in the previous notes for this video. No, I didn't. But they were pretty expensive, and it was because they worked so incredibly well with affinity for artifacts or like metalcraft type strategies. And to this day, if that's the kind of deck that you're running, if this is an artifact affinity deck, one of the easiest ways to make it more powerful is to make sure that all of your lands are also artifacts wherever possible. So having a ton of artifact lands just based on that alone seems like it would be really powerful. Now, I guess they are balanced a bit by the fact that artifacts are easier to destroy than land, so this leaves your lands a little bit uncharacteristically open to destruction, especially one-sided destruction that can be really unfortunate for your mana base. But these artifacts are indestructible, and I just really don't get how they're not more expensive and how they aren't used in a lot more decks, I guess. But if you are running affinity, especially in your commander deck, even if you're running like a high-priced affinity deck with all the budget in the world, you're probably still running these, I would think, just because you can only run so many of the other ones. Like, you really want as many artifacts as you can in your deck, and getting them into your mana base as well is just a really powerful way of doing that. So I really like these cards. They're all bridges. They're called bridges. Example here being the Dark Moss Bridge for 20 cents. So with all of those dual type lands being talked about and why you might want them, how they combo with each other, those kinds of things, let's talk about them in terms of least to most expensive. Because the cheapest of these, you may remember, was the tap, not the tap, but the sack try. The lands that called for 3 basic land types that sacrifice themselves and fetch that as soon as they come onto the field. This happens at no cost of life to you, and it's just what they do. These are only 5 cents a piece, making them by far the cheapest land on the list. Like, you could buy a playset of these for your 60-card deck, tricolor 60-card deck, for the price of a lot of the other lands, just one-ofs. At 15 cents, we have the bounce lands, the dual type, the dual basic type lands. We also have the tap and sack tries. And of these, I think the bounce lands are also really cool. If you have a way to abuse these in some way, there are ways to manipulate them. If you can untap your lands at any point, or if you have something that you can like pay 1 to untap a land, then this untaps for 2, and then you can pay 2 and then untap it again, maybe? I don't know. They can go infinite. They do things that lands aren't supposed to do, so they're cool. You can combo with these. But I also really like the tap sack tries. The sack tries are 3 times as cheap, but if, again, this is a commander deck, so I'm only getting maybe 1 of, and we're talking about, and you could get multiple, like, of the tap sack or the sack tries. Like, let's say you're running green, black, white, you could run, like, the Esper one, like the blue, black, white, because that's got 2 of your colors. You could essentially run these as like duels. And I'm just saying, you could have a lot of the sack tries in a deck, even if some aspects of the card don't necessarily meet your color identity. You just never use that part. It's essentially a dual land instead of a try. And I say this because, well, as we move on to 20 cents, we still haven't come to those dual lands, the tap sack duels. So I'm just saying, instead of getting the tap sack duel that seems appropriate for your deck, maybe you could buy some slightly inappropriate tap sack tries and just have a lot of them, and save a little bit of money that way. It might look a little weird to some people and might even throw them off, thinking, oh, well, maybe they do have some blue in their deck somewhere, despite me staring at the commander and only seeing green, black, white. But the 20 cent land that we have in our next slot are the Artifact Indestructible lands. They're kind of right here in the middle of the list. And honestly, I think there's something that you probably would ignore if it weren't for, I don't know. If you had effects that would destroy all lands, having indestructible lands would make the land wipe asymmetrical, which could be cool for you. But otherwise, I think that, and that's a vile strategy. People are going to hate it and like hate you for it. But I think the other strategy is definitely Artifact Affinity or Metalcraft type decks. I think those really benefit from these. Otherwise, you probably don't get them. And then for 25 cents, we have the 3-color Triumphs, the Tap Sack Duels, which I don't recommend, but like if you've already got the other things, you still need more cheap non-basics. They're inexpensive, it's still only 25 cents. Then you have the Reveal Duels and the Scrylands, which I highly recommend. They even put the Scrylands often in Precons. You'll see those a lot in Precons, especially since Theros. And then for 30 cents, we finally have the Slow Lands, which, you know, if you're only getting one of these lands, really, and putting it in with your basic lands, the Slow Lands have got to be the best way to go. And then we have the Dual-type Snow Lands, which are, again, those ones that have 2 of the basic land types, but they're also Snow Lands. And you probably don't need Snow Lands, you probably don't have any snow strategies, but if you do, then you're happy that I mentioned these because they are fairly inexpensive in ways for you to get additional snow mana or snow generated mana or whatever. However, I've never played a snow deck. I don't know how this works, but they are snow sources for you. And if you do play snow, then you're looking for that. I know that feels like such a niche, but yeah, it's way more niche than Artifact Affinity, at least. Okay, so that's your kind of land buying guide from me, Jackie Fox. That'll help you get into your first commander deck. But really, one of the biggest things I think has helped, and one of the things that worked the best, Precons have gotten pretty decent recently. Like, they're getting better and better balanced. The staple cards are getting a bit better. The commanders are honestly getting a little bit pushed in some of these things, and the reprints are nice. But also, it gives you a lot of the staple cards for the format. It gives you a lot of the, you know, some of the non-basic lands you're going to want in your color. Like, you may, as I said, see things like temples and a lot of the other cards that I've recommended potentially showing up in the deck list for your pre-constructed commander deck. And I would recommend that you look at the deck list, and if you've played Arena, you kind of have some familiarity with how certain strategies work, you can kind of look at this and say, is that a thing that I would like to play? And then these usually cost like $40 to $50, but again, they're pretty much playable out of the box. I've played a number of other commander players who are playing Precons, and they're interesting. I think what's really fun is like taking that and then tuning it and making it more powerful and customizing it and blinging it out and all that stuff. That's what excites me. But I just recently started with the Clavineo. Calvineo. Personally, I got started with the Calvineo deck, and Calvineo, First of the Blessed, is just both a really inexpensive commander to get onto the field, but in addition to that, a really brutal one, especially if your opponents don't have means of exile or removing your creatures without seeing them die or things like that. But also, I really like the synergies of the Vampire Tribal. I'm really enjoying kind of the Aristocrat format. It's an interesting place to be at, and it really does interesting things, I think, potentially in multiplayer, especially with one-sided board wipe is really what I'm aiming for now. Trying to be aggressive enough that not only can I have the cards to combo with that alone, but also that I can have the board presence to maybe clean up afterwards as well. So that is what I'm thinking about, and I will also probably be making a video in the future about kind of how I've customized that deck as well, what I've taken in, what I've taken out, and why, and how I've upgraded it since purchase, to kind of give you an idea of how you might customize some of your own decks, or if you've bought the Calvineo deck and you're curious what you should do, or maybe some ideas of other cards or strategies to use with that deck to make it more powerful, then be sure to tune into that video. But in the meantime, thank you very much for tuning in. I've been Jackie Fox. We've been playing Magic the Gathering together, and tune in and like and subscribe. There's a lot of games represented on this channel, Final Fantasy or Magic the Gathering. Either one of those two are kind of the things that my gaming nostalgia tends to draw me towards. But if you've enjoyed it, again, remember to like and subscribe, and check out that link in the description leading to the link tree that's going to lead you to all different branches of the Jackie Fox media universe. But, well, until I see you in the next one, be sure to check those out, and I will see you next time.